Welcome to Verify in Field, the Millwork podcast. Your host, Jacob Edmond, CEO of Ductworks, will be interviewing experts in the industry to bring you insights and knowledge about the latest trends, techniques, and challenges in millwork. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, this podcast is for you. So sit back, relax, and join us as we explore the world of millwork. Here's Jacob.
Today we have Sam Wall. Sam and I spent some time together at USA Millwork. And currently, Sam, you work for WilsonArt as a sales rep, right?
That's correct. Yeah, WilsonArt out of the Atlanta area. I cover a territory around here.
Awesome. And thanks for joining us today on Verify in Field. Today we're going to talk a little bit about supply chain in the millwork industry and just some of the challenges and what that really looks like.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thanks for having me, Jacob.
Yeah, thanks. So I think to get started, if you want to tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into the millwork industry, and just your path to where you are today.
Yeah. I started working at Ace Hardware right out of high school in that, retail building material type industry. I was there for a couple of years and then went to Home Depot, worked my way up that food chain for a little over 6 years. So that's how I got to the job that led me into the industry.
Mm-hmm.
I got into a company that built point of purchase displays and I started purchasing for them. They had a small caseworks department with some national accounts and doing some small caseworks. And then, so after Home Depot, I got started into the display division, being a purchasing manager for them. They built point of purchase displays. And again, they had a small caseworks division, some national accounts that they were building caseworks for. And then after a couple of years of me being there, they started an architectural millwork division doing some higher end hospitality work, some multifamily stuff. And that is what kind of sparked my passion to dive deeper into the architectural millwork side of things. And I was really wanting to focus on that. And that's what led me to USA Millwork, which is where you and I met. I was supporting the Atlanta location for up until they dissolved USA Millwork. After USA Millwork, I got into sales, believe it or not. So I reached out to all the vendors that I had purchased from in the past, looking for work or job opportunities, not necessarily into sales, just looking for what other procurement jobs may have been out there or anything that was out there. And got into the sales side of things. I was working for a distributor here in Atlanta, and then for about 6 months. And then at IWF show was where me and WilsonArt got to talking, and I've been with them since last October. So
nice. The majority of your time in millwork has been around or working in supply chain, right?
Yeah. So even at the display company, I was over the warehouse and over receiving department. I was over and when they started that millwork division, trying to juggle between both sides of the companies were difficult. And even at USA Millwork, the purchasing side at USA Millwork was a kind of a corporate role, right? There was a corporate division that we worked with, but I supported the Atlanta facility. So working closely with the warehouse team, logistics, and really every department, right?
Yeah.
That's how, especially in procurement, but supply chain as a whole, working with every department is important.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that for a second. I'm sure you probably get questions like this as I do about like USA Millwork, what happened with it? What was your experience like there? But just for those who maybe are curious and don't know or are familiar with USA Millwork, as you said, you had 5 locations, the peak there, and about a year and a half ago, ultimately, USA Millwork dissolved. And more specifically for people, because I think for a lot of people, they think, okay, it just shut down and went away. Ultimately, what USA Millwork was 5 different companies that were acquired and made as a part of this one parent organization, USA Millwork. And so 4 of those 5 still exist today and are still operating. They didn't cease to exist. Essentially, they were bought by new owners and continue to operate. It's the corporate entity that they're all part of one company no longer exists, right? And so specifically, you and I were based out of this Atlanta location. And as you mentioned, though, a lot of the vision of what USA and what we actually did execute there was the creation or kind of merging of certain shared services, shared functions in the business. And so obviously one of the first ones that began to roll up was finance and accounting. I was brought on to work towards standardizing and centralizing engineering and drafting. You were a part of supply chain, which was another one of the ones that was very quickly merged, integrated. Yeah, is a better term. And so what that meant, what that looked like, and I know we're going off at a little bit of a tangent here, but I think this is still an important idea that I think still is being pursued by some other millwork companies, and I think can be done successfully, was ultimately done pretty successfully at USA Millwork, was the idea that, okay, we were able to leverage vendors and relationships that maybe just one of our locations didn't have access to in the Southeast, but through our sister companies within USA Millwork, we were able to. And two, and you were doing this a lot, was accessing inventory that we had at our other locations, as well as sharing those and helping with buying across. Right. So you were a part of a team of buyers ultimately, right? That were based at each of our locations, but a lot of times you were really daily, you were as we're working together. Like, right. Atlanta needs this laminate, or Atlanta needs this hardware. I'm struggling to find it, or does anybody else have it or have access to a better vendor for this, right? Talk a little bit about that dynamic and some of the things that you learned from your time at USA Millwork that either impact like how you work now as a sales rep, but also that were just unique that you didn't have previously at the display company.
Yes, utilizing all the other divisions was highly important in what we were trying to accomplish with trying to get material into whatever location it may be, especially during the pandemic, mm-hmm. right? With the supply chain issues and delay in material because of the pandemic, we had to reach out to every source that we could find to acquire material. So a lot of it, is just networking, right? And understanding where the manufacturers are distributing to. Is it something that we purchase direct from manufacturing that may have in a specific location, or is it a distributor that can distribute that product that they've bought either pre-pandemic or are able to get access to more material just because of their purchasing volume? So it was a lot of collaboration between all the buyers and all locations of, like you said, I need this specific hardware, or even substrate or raw material, MDF, particle board, plywood. I need this amount of material, and where's the Atlanta market doesn't have it for whatever reason. So let me reach out to California or to the Great Lakes area and see what they're able to acquire. And a lot of it was also pricing as well, right? So the Southeastern tends to have a little bit better pricing than some of the mills and distributors out west per se. So we would try to utilize some of the vendors here I would source from to acquire some of those materials at cheaper price, right? That was our whole game there. Yeah, at the other company, we didn't have that. Being able to network, right, with other millwork companies, I think is important. You can do that. And if you're able to continue to network and reach out to the vendors are there to help you, and they can put you in contact with other buyers and of other millwork companies that can help you source stuff.
Yeah, because I even see sometimes like on the AWI forums, people will post, say, hey, I'm trying to find this. Is there any chance that somebody else has any in their attic stock or something, right? Because a lot of times that happens, like just speaking of WilsonArt, a particular solid surface or laminate might be discontinued. Right. And so all that exists is what's in the market, right?
Right.
But maybe there's a mill worker that bought excess of it for a school 3 years ago, and they're still sitting on 100 sheets, right? And they are looking for an opportunity to offload that. And you're looking for maybe to do a change order for a job that had that color that doesn't exist.
Yeah. And it's important, right? It's important to use that inventory because the money that's tied up in inventory is a large portion of the P&L statements of these millwork companies. So
right.
That's a separate conversation, right? On how do you go about using that excess inventory when it's being open-minded about it. How can you use that excess inventory in a way that makes sense and still meet spec for the job?
No, I know that was also a lot of initiative we had at USA Millwork that maybe I imagine was probably new for you as a buyer to be thinking not just about, hey, how do I've got a requisition from engineering or for project management for this. I just need to get what the shop needs.
Correct.
Versus, hey, how are we also trying to think about the bottom line and thinking about how to be not just resourceful, but smart
Right.
and like not just sitting on all this inventory, thinking about that as an asset, right?
Right. And we had to, right?
Mhm.
Because of the pandemic, mainly we had to, right? A lot of for instance, MDF mills, right? They were putting some of the distributors on allocation, meaning that based off of history of purchases, right? So a specific distributor may not be able to get the amount of material that they were in the past. So they allocate certain trucks a month, or they were
Mhm.
allocating certain trucks a month. And the MDF mills they were only running common sizes. So 4x8s, 5x12s, 3/4 inch thick, right? They weren't going too far outside of that. A lot of the MDF was going to molding mills, right? For like the Home Depots and the Lowe's that were, because during the pandemic that the residential and the DIY kind of exploded.
Oh, yeah.
People were stuck and had money in their pockets and they were needed to dump it into their houses. A lot of those MDF mills were only running moldings, or a lot of it was going to moldings for the Home Depots and the big buyers that way. So we had to think outside the box in order to use what was needed that
Right.
came across our desk to purchase.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit because we've touched on it, but this is something that I know still is a little bit of a foreign or confusing concept to me, and I'm sure to a lot of people. The idea, and this is probably, I don't know if this exists in other countries, but I know in the US, you've got the manufacturer of raw goods, right? So mills who make moldings or MDF, right? Or even like the manufacturers like Bloom and people who supply the hardware. But then you've got the distributors,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes those are one and the same. Sometimes they're not. And sometimes it varies big by region. Right? And you touched on this a little bit. Allocation was one of the things people maybe hear about, but they don't totally understand is like Bloom was a big one. Okay. I know Bloom's making enough of what I need, but my supplier is on allocation, meaning they literally have an allowance per month of how many they're getting total.
Correct.
And then they're probably limiting each customer based on what they get. Right. But if I need more than they can give me, I need to go outside of that distributor, but because of my location, there might be contract obligations or restrictions. Talk a little bit about that and what are some things that those hoops that supply chain buyers have to jump through and how it like makes sense.
Yes, again, right. It's at USA Millwork, at least we were able to utilize the Atlantic, like you said, the Atlanta location had a specific, let's say for Bloom Hardware, had a specific amount that they could buy from different distributors. As a buyer, right, you got to understand who is distributing it, right? There's multiple people out there that are distributing Bloom hardware. So it's trying to know who your vendors are, right? That's important. But it's also, do you have to use Bloom hardware, right? That was something that was deep into my mind is a shop that uses the Bloom hardware, right? They've used it so heavily in the past, right? Is there another alternative to what you can use? Because between Bloom and Grass and Salici, right, they're all based off of the same system. So you can, as long as your shop is able to interchange efficiently, then you can find alternate sources or alternate material rather to be able to use that.
But I guess also to just explain the distributor concept and model to people who aren't familiar with it, maybe who aren't in buyers, like what it essentially means, and correct me if I'm wrong, is like Bloom, for example, they have contracts with distributors that say only you can sell this
Right.
product in these areas, right?
Correct.
And so the idea there is for Bloom, they're able to say, okay, we're focused on making the product, and this company is now responsible for making sure that this region gets that product. Now, for the buyer's perspective, though, that introduces some difficulties in that I can't get that product unless I go through this distributor, right?
Correct. Yeah, you can't. Bloom, they don't necessarily sell direct to the mill worker. So yeah, that those agreements and those contracts are there. Now, the Atlanta market, I think, is very different, which we discovered at USA Millwork, right? There's so many distributors in the Atlanta market and really in the Southeast that can sell that product. And so I think the Atlanta market it was a lot easier for us compared to somewhere like the Great Lakes. For instance, they had, I think for raw material and board, there were really only two major distributors that would be able to distribute into that area up there. Whereas Atlanta has 6, 7 major distributors in the Southeast that can deliver material to the fabricators around this area.
Yeah, I think that's important because for a lot of like smaller shops and even just consumers that may be listening, like seems like why is this even a discussion? Because like, oh, I can go on Amazon and buy some Euro hinges, right? Or I can go to Home Depot and I can buy those slides. But what you're talking about at the manufacturer level is a couple of things. One, being able to buy in the volume that you're consuming them, which is very high for a lot of these. Like hinges for a lot of manufacturers are considered essentially consumables, or they're at least something that you're buying by pallet load or by the boxes, right? And you're going through hundreds of thousands of these. And so that's not a volume that just you can get just anywhere.
Correct.
And two, it's more, so like with board and stuff, you're looking for a distributor that can deliver to you. And so like smaller shops, there's a lot of smaller cabinet shops, right? And so I even see them posting online, hey, I'm finding mine off Amazon, right? But you're paying a price per unit that when you get into that volume is unsustainable.
Correct.
And so you're just say, oh, I have a small cabinet job. I need 30 hinges. I can go order those on Amazon, buy them. But it's the ability for a distributor to deliver to you in the volume that need at the price point that makes sense and at the speed that you need. Because a lot of times it might be boards. Okay, hey, I need 100 boards Monday.
Right.
Not just anybody can do that.
Right. Yes. As the millwork, when you're building, let's say, a giant skyrise, millwork tends to be the last trade that goes into this. So that job may have been estimated or bid out, years prior, and it finally comes across the purchaser's desk to purchase a pallet of hinges during the pandemic. And you're still somewhat seeing it now that supply chain, it's getting a large volume of material is still tending to be difficult. So it's important for the supply chain team and purchasing specifically to be upfront on every job, right? Being in the meetings and the takeoff meetings and being connected with estimating to see that what is it that we are going to need to be able to procure in the years down the road when the millwork finally does make it into this building. Because after millwork, the building opens. If millwork's delayed, the building opening is delayed, and that's what a lot of it is, material delays.
And so that's something else that definitely I think changed pretty well in the pandemic was millwork manufacturing in particular, and manufacturing in general, very much had a shift over the last decade or two towards just-in-time purchasing.
Right.
And so it was very much of like, hey, we don't need this material until we're going to start cutting it, assembling it, whatever. So supply chain was focused on, hey, we don't want to carry a lot of inventory. So we want to make sure, and distributors catered to this. And they said, okay, there might be supplier managed inventory, or just they got very good at like knowing and anticipating and saying, okay, you need these hinges next week. I'm not going to bring them until you're ready to start using them. The pandemic forced a lot of manufacturers to rethink that and start shifting towards like, wow, that really screwed us because we were caught with our pants down and we didn't have this. And now there's a shortage of this material and everybody's buying it up. Right.
Right.
So a lot of people then started going towards, okay, what materials and raw goods and hardware are vital to our operation, and let's stockpile those. Right. One, we can buy them at a price that we know we can make money at. And two, we know that we have them. So I can go service that type of work. But as a buyer, you also had to shift and start anticipating. And that's where you mentioned this, being in the kickoff meetings and the handoff meetings and being able to anticipate at kickoff, hey, this is a huge wall paneling job. We're going to need a ton of fire rated MDF, right? So start value engineering at that. What can we get at that volume?
Right.
And then how do we make sure that engineering is drawing this project with what we know we can buy?
Correct.
Do we need to supplement and say, hey, blooms on allocation, let's get Celiche approved and plan for that. And then let's go ahead and buy them and have them 6 months in advance So that was definitely a shift, I would say, that happened towards the pandemic, right?
Yeah, it definitely was. Yeah, I agree.
And so what were some of the things that we were doing, things that might be takeaways? Because the majority of millwork companies have probably one buyer in the US, I would say, right?
Yeah, I would say there's a purchasing manager that kind of is over, or maybe a supply chain manager, I guess you could say, that's over receiving an inventory. And then they do have a buyer that is a role to just send off POs and buy what comes across their desk.
And by and large, almost every company that I've worked with or talked to or is material takeoffs is kind of this perpetual problem, both accuracy, when it gets done, and then creating this like log jam in purchasing. And there's a lot of different ways, but ultimately there's a couple aspects to this that is like, okay, who does the material takeoff? In a lot of smaller shops, it's either project manager or kind of like somebody higher up that, is like, oh, the only one who knows how to do this, or they do it early on. Usually as you get bigger and more advanced and more organized, that it starts to shift towards like engineering or somebody more involved in the project itself, right? But it's also because of this history of like just in time, and a lot of shops will just buy project. They don't carry a lot of inventory. Is okay, we're going to wait till we have everything fully engineered, and then we're going to give a material takeoff to purchasing at the last minute. Right. And then we need to get all the materials here so that in a week we can be cutting what we just released, right?
Right.
And that doesn't generally go well.
No, it doesn't. And it's hard on the latter ends of the projects when you need some of those reworks or some of those change orders or whatever, and you're having to buy a few sheets or a few quantity to finish the job, when, especially during the pandemic, right, it was so hard to buy one or two sheets of an odd size material or a small, a couple of slides, when they're wanting, you got to buy pallets, right? And that's what made that's difficult to do.
Yeah, definitely. So being able to, whether it's thinking across multiple projects, hey, do we need this on this? Is there any other projects we have? So as a buyer, a lot of times you're probably going and then asking all your other project managers, hey, I'm about to buy one of this. Is there anybody else that either needs something else from this vendor or needs this for upcoming projects where I can buy at least a little bit more at once, right?
Right.
A lot of times it's up to the buyer doing that coordination and trying. That's where, you touched on this early, but you're coordinating with really all functions, all departments, right? Because you're buying all the project specific materials, and you're mostly dealing probably with project management, estimating, engineering, right? You're buying all of the consumables and shop supplies. So you're dealing with your finishing, your hardware guys, your cabinet line guys, and trying to make sure, hey, when we're getting low on fasteners and glue and that type of stuff, you've got all these cycles you're probably managing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we could talk about how the budgets, right, of the jobs or of the material that is allocated for the job, right? Whose responsibility is it to maintain that budget? The interesting concept, right? At USA Millwork or at other companies, procurement, right? They are there to understand the budget and to ensure that what you're buying is either meeting the budget or the information, right, is given up front to the estimating team or to the project manager, saying that we will not meet the budget based off of when this was estimated or based off of what the current price is. So that's, procurement working with that project management team is important. Again, using the engineering department, right? Using the surplus inventory, changing that commonly used hardware, using oddball substrates for better optimization, right? That's kind of procurement or supply chain working with engineering their operations. You're also procuring the PPE equipment and the glues and the stuff that are commonly used.
You might even be negotiating trash contracts or other types of things like that.
Indirect procurement is another facet that we could have a whole conversation on.
Yeah. And none of that's even talking about subcontractors and vendors and stuff like that, where you might be, hey, competitively bidding the glass buyout, the stone buyout, the install or something, or even just freight, things that fall into that. So a little bit more about your role now. You've shifted from a supply chain buyer to now you're in a role as a sales representative for a region of WilsonArt.
Correct.
Tell me a little bit about what that looks like, because WilsonArt is obviously a manufacturer of a lot of products that almost everybody listening to this probably uses, but also works through a distributor model, right? At least partially.
Correct.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what that looks like, what your role for WilsonArt looks like. You're not, I assume, selling directly to most of your clients.
I support the Atlanta distribution center. So we are distributing to the buyers of these millwork shops. So WilsonArt owns our distribution network, right? There's, I believe, 14 different WilsonArt owned distributions. So going from, back it up, going from purchasing to sales was, I knew the material because I had bought it over the past 6 years, but going from purchasing to selling, right, it was a brain click, right? Walking into a shop was difficult, right? Just being able to walk into a shop, cold call someone to say, hey, use this material was difficult, but we do very well at our distribution.
So talk a little bit about when you say distribution, that's different than distributors. Like you have distribution centers, 14, you said WilsonArt has. That's literally the places where they bring in the goods from where they're manufactured and then truck them from there to the customers, right?
Correct. Manufacturing for plastic laminate is our bread and butter. So we have 2 manufacturings, one in Texas, one in the Carolinas, that we distribute to our 14 distributors. And then our distributors, like myself, we distribute to the millwork shops, right? We also have independent distributors, the Worth Wood Groups and other distributors out there that are also calling on these shops. There's hubs around WilsonArt that distribute to some of those independent distributors. And then those sales guys in turn are calling on the millworkers and distributing that material.
Okay. So to clarify something for me, because I started my career in South Carolina at several shops there. And then I've spent time in the Atlanta area at a couple different shops. And I've never been a buyer myself, but I've worked with buyers and I've always heard a lot of different distributor names for different laminates. Obviously there's Formica, there's a bed, there's a lot of other things. Right. So I'm probably getting a lot of these mixed up, and I also know there's been a lot of history of certain distributors or vendors getting bought and merged, right? You've got like Worth and Rugby and a lot of these names that people are familiar with. So if I'm a buyer right now in Georgia somewhere and I need to buy WilsonArt, am I buying it from WilsonArt? Or are there other places I might be buying it from, other vendors?
So WilsonArt specifically is the only contracted distributor in the Atlanta area to sell our laminate is Worth Wood Group. So it's a funny way that I guess it works, right? In a sense, we're competitors, but we try to see it as they're able to reach other smaller cabinet shops throughout Georgia that helps us because WilsonArt is such a heavily spec'd item and it's a hard spec.
Right. And it's not something, particularly laminate, it's not something you're generally like, if they pick that color, that's what the shop is going to buy. The architect spec a Formica color, that's what they're going to buy, other than like commodities colors, maybe, right?
Yeah. So those independent distributors are important to be able to get to the small shops that are doing residential cabinets, right? Or residential countertops that are way far away that it doesn't make sense for us to be able to get to. So we try to utilize them in that regard.
Right. So talk a little bit about the other products that WilsonArt actually makes and sell. And everybody knows and probably is familiar with laminate.
Right.
But there are other products in the portfolio, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Staying on the distribution, right? So it's a solid surface or quartz spec comes across the desk to purchase. Whoever's fabricating it, because there's millwork companies that do fabricate their own solid surface, and then there's fabricators that sub out that portion. So WilsonArt sells quartz and solid surface to those fabricators. They're contractually, they're not able to get it in this Atlanta market. Now there's other areas in the country where they can buy solid surface and quartz through an independent distributor as well as WilsonArt. It just depends on how the contract was written right in this specific area.
But WilsonArt does make a lot of solid surface and a lot of quartz, right?
Yeah, we do. We recently, within the past, I think 6 years, we bought a manufacturing plant in the Czech Republic to make our quartz. We manufacture our solid surface in those 2 same locations out in Texas. and in the Carolinas, that we make the vast majority of our countertop material.
Because from my experience, this is something that maybe is unique to millwork, but in our industry, there's a lot of long timers, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people who've been in this industry for a long time, and a lot of companies have buyers or people that are still buying based on outdated information. And so kind of on the hardware, there's a lot of shops who 10 years ago made the decision to go with Bloom because it was better. And they've never looked again at what's on the market.
Right.
Similarly, a lot of people think solid surface, they think Corian, and a lot of jobs come through with Corian color specs.
Right.
But WilsonArt, Mica, a lot of the manufacturers out there are, one, making more products today than people realize.
Right.
And in those different products categories, there's more options and parity than I think people realize.
Right.
So even if that's the case, like I've had a lot of times where the architect has spec'd a specific color from Ebonite or whoever, right? And that might be very hard to get, or might be very difficult, or also might just be cost prohibitive for their budget.
Right.
And we're able to find an almost identical match from a different manufacturer, right?
Right.
That is really the name of the game, right? Is everybody's making as much as possible a comparable product.
Right. And when I was in the procurement role, I was doing that. I was finding a spec material, and based off of cost or lead time or availability, if I wasn't able to get it at the price I needed it, when I needed it, I would try to change that spec to go to a competitor. Now, right, in my current role, I don't want that to happen. So
unless they're switching to you.
well, of course, yes.
Yeah. But are you finding yourself educating people on that of like, hey,
I think
you guys only buy Corian, but we have a product.
Correct. Yeah. And I think there's a lack of that education, right, in the millworkers on how that process actually works, right? On when you're building that big sky rise, right? The owner of the building hires a GC, and then they hire an architect, which is sometimes a designer, and they're speccing WilsonArt material. That whole process of how that kind of flows eventually into the shop, right? I think is undereducated, right? It's not taught. And I think it's important for even the guys in the shop building the cabinet, putting the cabinet together. I think it's important for them to understand that how it affects supply chain, right? And how it affects sales and how it affects the overall end product when that switch happens.
I think also in the episode previous to this, I was talking with Casey Schlegel, who runs Schlegel Design Build. We talked a lot about this dynamic of millworkers. By and large, we see certain things, we feel like we can't push back on it. We can't change anything. It's just like, this is the spec. We have to do exactly what they said. Right. Or even like things that don't make sense anymore that are boilerplate specs. Like architects will say, I want all plywood cores and I want laminate edges on my doors. And it's like, was the guidance 20 years ago,
right?
But material science and availability manufacturing have come a long way to where we as millworkers should be seeing ourselves as the subject matter expert in what we make. Correct. And we, one, should be educating ourselves to be that, but two, we should have the confidence to be able to then push back on the client and educate them and not just say, hey, look, we don't want to do what you want. We want to do what we want. But hey, the reason we're substituting PVC edges over laminate is because it's a better product. It's actually giving you your design intent in a better way than you know is possible. And similarly with value engineering materials, a lot of times, sometimes it might not be like we're substituting not just to save you money or save us money. Like sometimes it is, we want to pass the cost savings to you, but two, sometimes it's thinking future. Like, hey, you guys have more phases of this and we don't have confidence that what you spec is going to be available in bulk.
Right.
And you're not going to want to change colors from floors 1 through 5 to floors 6 through 10. So if you pick this, we have confidence that you're going to get the look you want and it's going to be consistent through the life cycle of this job. And there's a lot of factors like that, right?
Yeah, there is. And WilsonArt does a good job at it. For instance, us and other manufacturers are very good at making plastic laminate look like real wood. And I think that's a change that's going to happen down the road is, for instance, real wood veneer, right? We're very good at making our laminate look like real wood veneer, and not just our laminate, our TFL operations as well. Speaking back to value engineering, if you're able to use a melamine or a TFL for your upper, using someone like WilsonArt to where we own the paper and we manufacture both the laminate and the TFL, it is an exact match. If If you're able to utilize those panels right in your uprights, the end product, as you were saying, is virtually going to be the same.
Yeah. And just to make sure everybody understands what Sam's discussing there, we're actually working with a client right now who does a lot of chain hotels and things like that, where the parent company says, hey, all Holiday Inns are going to refresh, right? And they all need to have this design. So there's a lot of volume, but two, they're picking a color. And so what they actually do is just what you described. And when you say uprights, what he's talking about is like, say you have a cabinet, your cabinet sides, your vertical members aren't going to be high wear surfaces, meaning they're not going to see a lot of wear, whereas your shelves, your countertops, those things where people are going to lay things, drag things across, those are going to see a lot of high wear. And generally on high wear surfaces, you want like thicker laminate, horizontal grade laminate, right? On your vertical surfaces, you could have essentially a TFL product, a thermally fused laminate, I think it is, but it's basically melamine, right?
Sure.
And because WilsonArt, so if they pick a WilsonArt color, WilsonArt makes that same color, that same spec, which might be a wood grain look, right?
Right.
In the TFL product, which is a melamine, where it's just that printed paper fused directly to particle board, for example.
Correct.
But then you also fuse it to a phenolic core that can then be pressed and be a higher wear. Correct. So I can get a finished product where everything is identical, looks the same, but the core product is actually, my vertical surfaces could be TFL. And that does a couple of things. Obviously, it's a cheaper product. And when you're doing something like hundreds of hotels across the country, that adds up to a lot of cost savings, both for the manufacturer, but also for the customer. Two, it streamlines the manufacturing process. You're getting a finished core product from WilsonArt, from the factory, whereas laminate, you're having to have somebody in middleman, maybe it's WilsonArt, maybe it's a distributor, press that onto the core that you need. Right. And it adds cost and time. And so there's benefit in having a single source, such as WilsonArt, to be able to say, hey, maybe the architect spec'd a Abbott or Formica or something, and you say, hey, I can get a comparable color. This is WilsonArt's version of that, for example. And because of that, now we can get this same color in multiple products for you. Maybe some of it needs to be in your bathrooms. You need to do bathroom partitions that they want to match. So you need to actually get solid core phenolic of that same color. I don't know, everybody who doesn't understand how laminate works, like it's actually layers of paper pressed together. And how many layers of that core, the substrate paper, it determines the grade of the laminate essentially, right? But that top layer that is the color, that can be just pressed straight to a core. And that's how you get a TFL or a veneer or a melamine. Paper, yeah. And also it's how you can get like a texture to it, right?
Yeah, it is. And the vinyl doors, membrane press doors, right? They do the same thing, being able to get that texture. And that's what I was saying, that we're getting very good at making plastic laminate look like real wood. So I think that veneer market it's just, we try to push the veneer market's a $4 billion market, right? And so we're trying to utilize some of our expertise in making that finish look the same in order to get into that type of market.
Awesome. So shifting gears a little bit, now you've spent a good amount of time in this industry as a buyer and now as on the kind of distributor supplier side. What are some trends that you're seeing, if any, that maybe are shifting, whether it be things that are being spec'd, things that are being bought or used now that you're kind of visiting more manufacturers? Is there anything that you're seeing coming?
Yeah, I think sustainability is starting to become more apparent in how the millwork is being built, whether it be the FSC specs in order to get specific LEED certifications, or is it just the manufacturers telling a story of how they sustainably source their wood material? Excuse me. WilsonArt, we pride ourselves in our sustainability. We have more post-consumer recyclable content than any other laminate manufacturer. We pride ourselves in our sustainability. So I think that as things progress, I think that sustainable factor in there is going to be important for millworkers.
And I assume it's also important just for the manufacturing, as being able to use recycled content, having to source woods and papers and that stuff that goes so largely into the making of such a volume product.
Yeah, and I also think that I think we're going to start seeing a lot more manufacturing become stateside, right?
Mhm.
I guess there was a recent another pass for import plywood, and which a couple years ago, right, there was a Chinese tariffs out there on anti-dumping and countervailing taxes, and you know, so they taxed a lot of the mills and importers bringing it into the States. And recently, some of the Vietnamese plywood, right, or they're doing the same thing. So I think we're going to start seeing a lot more manufacturing in the stateside, which is good for our economy.
So
Yeah.
based on different laws and that are being passed based on import taxes, it's going to shift that dynamic.
Yeah, it is. And we're finding different ways to use wood, right? The glue laminated timber is something that's becoming more and more popular. That's a growing market, transitioning from concrete and steel construction to that wood, right? I think, of course, there's still going to be needs for concrete and steel construction, but understanding how we're able to use wood in different manners, I think is something that we're going to start being able to see in the future as well.
There's two questions I like to ask every guest. And so the first is what do you see changing in the millwork industry over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, again, I really do think it's the products that we use, right? The end product, I think, is going to function the same and look the same, but it's how we use those products. For instance, like we were talking about making fake wood look like real wood. I think we're gonna transition into the millwork industry. So maybe specs are not going to be so heavily on real wood veneer, right? They may be able to find a more sustainable alternative to that. I think that's going to be something that we're going to see in regards to supply chain, right? As the pandemic ends, we're starting to see things become more readily available, but I personally don't see us getting back to pricing, right, as it was prior. So I think these higher costs of building materials in general, I think are going to remain for a while, even over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So that may answer your second question.
Yeah.
Is what's going to
stay the same,
right? And
You've done your homework.
and I really do think it's true, right?
Yeah.
As supply chain becomes
In some ways, the cat's out of the bag. It's not going back in.
correct. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So no, I think that I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience that we hadn't touched on yet?
If you're looking for more areas on how we are sustainable, wilsonart.com/sustainability is a good source. I encourage everyone to look into the FSC, which, if your listeners don't know, it's the Forestry Stewardship Council, and how that sustainability affects supply chain and how important it is.
Awesome. You shared the website, WilsonArt, how they can find more about WilsonArt. If people want to reach out and connect with you or find out more about.
Yeah, I'm pretty heavily on LinkedIn. You're welcome to send me an email to samuel.wall@wilsonart.com. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can type in my name, find me. Being who I am and going from supply chain to sales and my network, I'm happy to help out, source, and find different things for anyone, really.
Yeah. Awesome. Appreciate you taking time to talk today. And I think there's a lot of value everybody will get from this conversation about supply chain, and hope to continue this discussion and have you on again in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jacob.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Do you want to stay up to date about industry insights, new content, and our community of millworkers? Go to ductworksmw.com to sign up for our newsletter. I'll see you in the next episode of Verify in Field.